afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a new series of From Food for Sustainability webinars. This time we will start with a debate on carbon farming and hopefully to start to contribute to some clarification on what carbon farming really is and what it means for farmers, for the industry, and also for all of us, the consumers. I, Claudia Costa, on behalf of Food for Sustainability Academy, will be introducing apologies, our session today, and will be also addressing the questions you might have to our speakers. So our journey this afternoon aims to link regenerative farming to carbon farming. First, by exploring the roles of corporates play in driving the carbon farming markets. We'll have here the Food Animal Initiative to share our experience with us. Secondly, we are going to take a very brief flight to Sweden and Finland to see how carbon action is put into place with the main goal of saving the Baltic Sea, but essentially also to hear about the willingness and the vision of farmers, business and academics to bring this project together. More towards the end, we will be hearing from the European Parliament and its considerations on public policies towards higher social inclusion through the role that agriculture and rural communities play in this integral part of the carbon cycle. We'll be joined by the member of the European Parliament, Isabel Carvalhais. So this will be our session for today. But as usually, I cannot start these sessions without thanking my dedicated team to make these sessions possible, which you probably already know. So we have here with us Rita Silva, our microbiologist. Hello, Rita. Hi. We also have Daniela Fonseca, our biochemistry PhD. Hello, Daniela. And Silvia Moreira, our food science, technology and nutrition PhD. Silvia, hello, you're there. Camera off, and this team also runs the scientific developments from the CoLab around byproduct valorization and circular economy issues. I would also like to acknowledge Diogo Pinho, our soil specialist, for his support and ideas towards this webinar, and finally to Jill for all the work that she's been doing in translating these webinars for you. So thank you all for making this possible. And just before I start, let me remind you some house rules. So questions are very welcome, right, Daniela? So Daniela, could you kindly let us know how our audience can take part in our webinar?
Yes, absolutely. You just need to go to the Q&A and write down your questions. Please just make sure you put the name of the speaker to which the question is addressed to first, so we can understand to whom the question is addressed. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniela. Our webinar will run for about 1.5 hours, and the session will be recording for later viewing. Rita, can you please tell our participants when and where they can have our sessions available?
Sure. The webinar will be available in our website in next week, and I will put the link in the chat. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you for your kind words. So please, if you don't wish to appear, please remain with your cameras off. So as usual, let's start by setting the scene. And I will start by sharing some of the figures just to contextualize a little bit of our conversations. Because I'm on a new device, I will ask Rita to share the presentation. And while Rita shares the presentation, you all know that ecosystem services are an important part of the Food for Sustainability work. As we focus on circular economy and particularly on byproduct valorization, with also a special emphasis on soil microbiome, several spillovers result from this work. And one of them are obviously ecosystem services, biodiversity, water management, and most importantly for this session today, carbon sequestration. So let's just start by contextualize our discussion. Thank you, Rita. Can you kindly move to the next slide? Okay, thank you. So what we see is that for many centuries we lived in an equilibrium. So the rates of greenhouse gases that were released into the atmosphere were correctly balanced by the rate that these gases have been sequestered. So the composition in the atmosphere in terms of the gases has remained nearly constant and towards something that was never a point of concern to our activities. The question, as we all know, is that this balance has been disrupted by the increase in the emissions due to human activity. So gases are now accumulating in the atmosphere at an alarming rate, and they are actually altering the equilibrium that makes the atmosphere work as a good and beneficial system to the entire planet Earth. Next slide, please, Rita. So when we start to bring in the primary sector into this equation, we soon realize the importance of agriculture. Agriculture is not only one fundamental part of our economies, but it also occupies a large portion of all the global land area use. Recent figures mention about 35% of all land used is actually is for agriculture, which becomes to be the single most used human activity. And its scale and intensity means also that agriculture emits a large quantity of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Hutchins' study in 2007 pointed that a quarter of all dioxide carbon had an origin in agriculture. Half of the methane release was also due to agricultural activities, and a figure of around 70% of nitrous oxide were released via human sources. So under this daunting scenario, the good thing is that not all of these are bad news, because there are actually some good news. And the good news are that farmlands can, to a certain extent, control the amounts of these gases. In fact, in 2009, The Economist already pointed that agriculture would be the forests of the future. So what we have now in our hands is that by choosing different agricultural practices, it is actually possible to reduce emissions. Farmlands may even be negative emitters, so absorbing at a higher rate than they emit, and thus helping to capture carbon dioxide and therefore restore air quality. So we can see here is the potential for the farmland to act as a sink or a storehouse for carbon. And this is where we would like our discussions to start to address how can we turn this into a reality. Rita, next slide, please. Just before we show you this short video, we believe gives a very good context of what we are addressing here. Just to bring in some more factors into the equation is that even the carbon sequestration definition in academic terms is not very consensual. Some authors define carbon sequestration as a persistent increase in carbon storage, both in soil, in plant material, and in the sea, while others argue that only very permanent carbon can be regarded as sequestered carbon. And what we note is that the soil carbon varies in its degree of permanence. So we have here an extra factor that is time. And some authors say that we can have soil carbon as a modern soil carbon, while other components can be over 1,000 years. And we are introducing, the variable time, but just also to acknowledge that the first tentatives to measure carbon sequestration started in the late 60s. So we are talking about already over half a century ago, and this is something that is still not rocket science. We're still trying to fully understand how we can measure all this sequestration. So it would be very interesting to see whether we could increase these new regenerative practices to start to understand the role that time plays in the carbon sequestration efficiency. So this is something that science still needs to address. But let's see how carbon and agriculture can play together. Let's watch this small video that I'm sure is going to illustrate what I'm just saying. Rita, if you'll be so kind.
If you're like most people, you're probably feeling a little hopeless about climate change and the damage we've done to our planet. Well, now there's a new way to look at climate change and how to deal with it that might just turn that hopelessness into hope. Climate change, as we know, is all about too much carbon in our atmosphere. But carbon is not our enemy. It's the building block of life. Everything alive is made of it, even us. The problem and the solution are simply a matter of balance. Let's step back and look at the 5 pools where carbon is stored on planet Earth. Starting about 500 million years ago, when plants first appeared on land, carbon began to cycle in an amazing balance between these pools, a balance that allowed for life as we know it to evolve. Then one life form, that would be us, figured out how to extract carbon from the fossil pool, which was pretty much a timeout zone for carbon. We've been burning it for energy, putting into play, and disrupting that balance. The way we manage land and do agriculture is moving even more carbon into the atmosphere. Specifically, we've moved 880 billion tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which is heating up the planet and destabilizing our climate. The oceans have absorbed a lot of this excess carbon, throwing off the ocean's balance, resulting in ocean acidification and accelerating a mass extinction of sea life. So in order to save life as we know it, of course we need to stop burning fossil carbon. The big question is, where do we put this excess carbon to get the cycle back in balance? The good news is that the answer is literally right under our feet. It's the soil. Plants, using sunlight and water, naturally perform photosynthesis. They pull carbon in from the air and turn it into carbohydrates, sugars. Then they pump some of these sugars down through the roots to feed microorganisms who use that carbon to build healthy soil. Voila, carbon moved. The plants pump it in, and the soil stores it. Nature's living technology is amazing. Scientists have recently discovered that applying a thin layer of compost can help regenerate healthy soil, setting up an ongoing feedback loop that brings more and more carbon into the soil each year. Together with other regenerative practices like not tilling the soil, planting trees and cover crops, and planned grazing, we can build and retain billions of tons of soil carbon. This is carbon farming. This is regenerative agriculture. Unlike more carbon in the atmosphere, more carbon in the ground is good for us. It makes healthy soil, which is nutrient-rich and full of life and holds way more water. This means more nutritious food and crops that are more resilient in the face of drought. That's good news for farmers, families, and everyone who eats. Remember this: the way we grow our food, fiber, and fuel either puts carbon up into our atmosphere or pulls it down into the ground. The regeneration of soil is the task of our generation. Our health, the health of our soils, and the health of our planet are one and the same.
Fantastic. There is hope, and I also hope that you felt that this short video Thank you, Rita, no worries. I hope that this short video gave you an overview of what we are addressing during this session. So I would start with our first speaker, which we thought to be Øystein, but most unfortunately, Øystein had a problem. He was caught with COVID, like almost all of us. So please send our best wishes to Øystein. But very kindly, we have Carl Williams from FI, from the Food Animal Initiative. Carl, I will need to ask you to introduce, because I can only say a few words about FI, not about yourself. So at FI, you held the responsibility for strategy and new business development. I think at least the work from FI has been going on since 2012, winning and managing multiple partners. And this is an interesting part, partners including IKEA, Ferrero, KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and the work from FI has also been instrumental in the development of McDonald's broiler and antibiotic tracker, which is a very interesting tool. But Carl, I'll probably now hand over to you. You can present, just give a little bit background about yourself, and then we can hear very eagerly the presentation from the work you've been developing. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Claudia. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. As Claudia said, I'm a very late replacement for my colleague Øystein, who's come down with COVID. So I very quietly spoke to him earlier. He's pretty much sort of lost his voice, hence why he can't present. So I'm going to do my best to stand in for him this afternoon. I've got some notes, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm sort of reading through some of them. But yeah, just to give you a little bit of background on me, I come from a farming family. I've worked in agriculture for a number of years. I ended up at FAI around about 15 years ago. I started working with the business, and that was predominantly coming in and working with McDonald's Europe, as it was at the time, to run their program called Flagship Farmers. And then, I suppose the work with McDonald's has gradually sort of expanded. So I lead our projects that we are running with McDonald's UK and Ireland. So we've got a regenerative grazing project that we're running on the farm. So we've got a 1,000-acre farm that sits on the outskirts of Oxford. So we're in our third year of transition on the farm. So it's about understanding sort of that transition, and I suppose the metrics around what we need to be measuring sort of as an industry. And again, I think we view a lot of this from a farming perspective. Ease of use in regards to if we're expecting farmers to use carbon footprint tools, or we're expecting them to undertake sort of measures on farm, how easy is that? How challenging is that? So again, that's one of the benefits of sort of having the farm and having that sort of practical understanding of agriculture and farming that hopefully we sort of bring to the table. So I suppose I've worked, as I say, I've worked for FAI for 15 years. Yeah, and there's really the two elements to the business. So we've got the farm in Oxford, and then yeah, we work with I suppose yeah, several yeah, food businesses, retailers, food service companies around sort of yeah, food system impact, you know, sustainability of supply chain. So yeah, we really work with those partners to provide sort of actionable insight, you know, strategic advice. As Claudia said, yeah, we also provide digital solutions. So yeah, we work with several clients around collecting data, yeah, whether that be baseline data, antibiotic use, to fulfill sort of commitments that yeah, a lot of companies that are making. And I suppose yeah, this is really about, you know, transparency. You know, a lot of companies are yeah, eager to sort of show their green credentials in regards to sort of what they're doing and the work that's being undertaken within some of the supply chains. And it's not just about greenwashing. You know, we have, you know, the data to sort of support, you know, some of the impacts and changes that we've seen you know, within some of these supply chains. We've got a pretty diverse team. You know, yeah, we've got people that have come from the supply chain. You know, we've got vets, you know, agricultural, you know, farmers within the team. So yeah, we've got a pretty sort of diverse, you know, area of technical expertise. And we've also got, you know, an international presence. So yeah, we've got, you know, colleagues that are based in Norway, Germany. You know, we also work in Brazil, so we've got colleagues in Brazil, the US, we work in China, New Zealand. So yeah, we've got a pretty sort of international yeah, presence in regards to sort of yeah, the work that we undertake and the team that are involved with the business. So yeah, obviously what I want to talk to you about today is carbon. So, and I suppose yeah, this is a graphic that we sort of came up with a while back, that a lot of, you know, clients, you know, certainly I suppose yeah, what is top of the corporate agenda at the moment is yeah, net zero, you know, carbon reduction targets. I think yeah, we had COP obviously last year. Yeah, there's a lot of companies that sort of put forward you know, net zero targets by 2040 or 2050, and I suppose yeah, and I mean that has been you know, I suppose really welcomed by, you know, many people globally, that you know, I suppose yeah, a lot of the corporate companies are concerned about carbon emissions and they want to address it. But I suppose yeah, the challenge then becomes is we become quite, you know, tunnel vision on one aspect of, you know, all of the different issues that you know, that we have within that supply chain. Yeah, I mean, and again, it can be one of those things that we ignore to the, you know, to the cost of everything else if we go after, yeah, if we solely focus on carbon. You know, I think, you know, that's when we start talking about sustainable intensification, you know, is a word that will come around when, you know, you start talking about, you know, carbon reductions. You know, if that's a, you know, carbon reduction, you know, based on a litre of milk, or a, you know, a kilo of beef, or, you know, or a ton of potatoes, or a ton of wheat, you know, the whole sort of you know, conversation can turn to sustainable intensification, which, you know, becomes a danger, because we then start sort of ignoring some of the issues that you know, we're currently dealing with as a system. So you know, biodiversity loss, eutrophication, water use, overconsumption, air pollutants, you know, all of those things that we're looking at, you know, on the screen there. But I think yeah, what we've got, and that video, yeah, very nicely sort of, you know, and succinctly sort of touched on, you know, what we're supporting from an FAI perspective is regenerative agriculture. You know, what we want to make sure is the solutions for reducing carbon, you know, also promote an abundant, healthy, you know, a thriving ecosystem and a good life for everybody. You know, I think, you know, we know some of the drivers of greenhouse gas emissions in current, you know, if you want to call it conventional agriculture, you know, as land use change, you know, certainly, you know, and land disturbance, fossil fuel use in regards to fertilizers and fuels, methane from animals, nitrous oxide from waste. So we know these are some of the key drivers of carbon emissions, and Claudia gave us some of the figures associated to those earlier. There's the author of Drawdown is a guy called Paul Hawkins. So he explains the difference between current agriculture and regenerative agriculture, and he coins it in these terms. While conventional agriculture feeds the plants with chemical forms of nitrogen, potassium and phosphorus, and again, prices of which we know pretty much doubled in the last sort of 6 months. Regenerative agriculture feeds the soils and its microbes. The soil feeds the plants feeds the animals. So I think that's it's a different way of looking at the system and what we've got. So obviously what regenerative agriculture is trying to do is mimic nature. So and I suppose in agriculture, what we're trying to do, and again, and I suppose we see this on the farm in Oxford, the farm, the soils, the land, it's a succession. We've got 1,000 acres of broadleaf woodland around the farm, and predominantly that's what our land is trying to convert back to. So what we're trying to do in agriculture is hold it at a successional sort of stage. So, and certainly for monocrops, that's quite a challenge. That's why we get into using lots of chemicals, fungicides, pesticides, weed killers, because what nature's trying to do is she's trying to move that whole system forward. But what we're trying to do in agriculture is hold it at a successional sort of stage, which is incredibly costly in terms of money, and in terms of carbon. And obviously, what the benefit of regenerative agriculture is doing is it mimics, by mimicking nature, and we can use a set of farming practices and principles that are really about growing nutritious, nutrient-dense food, while improving the ecosystem in which food is grown. Regenerative agriculture consists of practices that produce positive outcomes on the soil, water, biodiversity, and reduces the carbon footprint. So our aim is, if we can show to our corporate clients that are committed to carbon reductions, that regenerative agriculture sort of provides a win-win solution in regards to this. What we really want to do is move regenerative agriculture from a niche sort of premium or segregated markets to becoming the roadmap for agricultural improvement going forward. So I suppose in essence, the goal is to use our corporate engagement around climate to bridge, to make regenerative agriculture the new conventional agriculture. So that's so it's a fairly lofty aim, but it's sort of what we're aiming to do. Just and so this slide, I think this slide is something that seems to resonate with a lot of people when we show this slide. I think I think we talk about sustainable agriculture in a way that is really sort of net zero. So it does no harm, and it does no benefit. So, and I always talk about sustainable agriculture being a little bit like if you had a bank account, and on the 1st of January there was £0 or €0 or $0 in that bank account, and you put a little bit of money in, you put $20 in, and you might take $30 out, and you do that through the year, and you get to the the 31st of December, and your balance is at zero again. So that's really what sustainable agriculture is. It's we're not in debit, and we're not in credit. I would argue, a lot of the sustainable programs, initiatives, probably really haven't been hitting that mark. I think, I think the term in itself, sustainable, has allowed a lot of companies to talk about, we've reduced fertilizer use by 10%, we've reduced water use by 15%, we've done this, by 10%. I don't think by any stretch that has been sustainable. And I think the very definition of the word has allowed that little bit of flex to go on. And really what we've been doing, where we've been taking from is nature. That's where we've been taking from. We've been dipping into our overdraft, but that overdraft is our ecosystems, our biodiversity. That's what's been propping up our food supply chain. So the opportunity to move to the right hand side of that screen to a regenerative system, which still supports a flourishing food and agricultural system, because again, this is what we've seen on the farm. The farm's been organic. We've been on the farm for 21 years now. The farm was organic, right at the start. And what we've certainly seen in the last probably 2 years of our transition is our finishing times. We were probably finishing cattle around 26, 27 months of age. That's probably dropped, to about 21, 22 months. So we've knocked 4 to 5 months of our finishing time. We're finishing at the same weights, at the same grades, no fertilizers, no purchase feed. This is predominantly off of a forage-based organic system, and we've been amazed at the transition that we've seen in the farm, and that system's ability to support what is an increasing output for us. So I think there tends to be a feeling that regenerative agriculture sits somewhere similar to organic. If you're going to move to an organic system, you're looking at a reduction in output of anything from 10 to 20%, which is why we're looking for an increase in price for the products that we're providing out of an organic system. That is definitely not what we're seeing from the system that we're running at FAI. And I think again, ecosystem processes were talked about earlier, and again, what we're looking at is a food system again, which is sort of mimicking this natural system that we've got, and again. And it's really interesting, I suppose what we're looking at is a set of principles. So this isn't a sort of prescriptive set of standards or requirements. And I think that, this is the beauty of regenerative agriculture. Every farm is unique. Every farm is different. You've got a different history. You've got different management. You've got different livestock. You've got different machinery. You've got different soil types. You've got everything is different. Every farm is unique as an individual sort of fingerprint. And I think that we work around a set of principles which are pretty sort of broad. But we're aiming at a very sort of clear set of outcomes, which is obviously sequestering more carbon, and all of those benefits that we see within regenerative agriculture. And I think there's some great examples there of regenerative farming principles, practices, whatever you want to call them, which is keep the soil covered with organic material, again, which I think we saw in the video. Minimize repetitive soil disturbance. So again, any soil disturbance has quite an impact on the biology of the soils. Maximize diversity in crops, pasture, plants and habitats. So again, it's moving away from monocultures. We know the interaction of diverse crops in regards to sort of supporting our bacteria and fungi have quite a profound benefit. Maintaining a living plant in the soil all year round, and integrate livestock, says that, or wild animals. And again, I think this is the opportunity where we've got that ability to integrate livestock. Certainly, those of you that are on the call that you're involved in the dairy or the meat industry, at the moment, everybody I suppose sees the red meat sector or the dairy sector as somehow being responsible for climate change. And I think and again, you'll hear a lot of rhetoric around, if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, then stop eating red meat, reduce your consumption of dairy products. And I think that is a message that seems to be sort of getting through. I mean, I would say I suppose the oil industry has done a very, very good job of shifting the focus from them onto the food supply chain. And we've done a pretty poor job in sort of fighting back in regards to coming up with challenges to some of that rhetoric. But again, I think it really brings an opportunity around bringing livestock, and again, that's what we've seen on the farm in Oxford, that livestock can really sort of expedite all of the ecosystem services that we're seeing. Biodiversity on the farm has increased massively, and some real benefits to having those livestock on the farm. So I think that's me done. Hopefully I covered everything. So if
Thank you so much, Carl. That
No
was
problem.
a great presentation, and you definitely touched a lot of very, polemic topics. You started by, the definition of sustainability, which is something that everyone uses at their own interests, and it would be, I think, it would be beneficial that we all as a system agree on a definition about sustainability. Also, I really enjoy the way you put it, that the beauty in farms is that every farm is unique, because mostly we hear that as one of the challenges to move forward, because there are no recipes. And we fully agree with you on the rhetorics on agriculture. Agriculture has been poorly in terms of communicating its good aspects and the potential that it has to change the world and to improve the world. So thank you for that, for bringing again those aspects into the table. Before we start with the audience, I would like to start by thinking a little bit more about the role of the corporates. And one of the things that has been often talked is about the need to have a certification around regenerative agriculture and carbon sequestration. And you obviously seems to be arguing that we don't need this type of certification, because there are plenty of certifications already in the markets. So from the point of view of the big players, that we know that they are the ones that can actually make a difference, because what we hear is that the farmers, they of course they care for the land, of course they care for the soils, for biodiversity, but they feel powerless if they don't have a market. So what is the narrative here for these big, you mentioned McDonald's, IKEA, Ferrero, what is the narrative for the regenerative agriculture into these players? What can we do as farmers and consumers to strengthen this narrative?
Yeah, and I think that's that's a very, very good question. I think one of the challenges I think that we've currently got is regenerative agriculture is quite niche. And I think how that supply chain usually works is if they see a product that they want, let's say, I don't know, free range eggs, for example, they put a buying signal into the market. We're going to buy, we're changing from cage free to free range eggs. So the buying signal goes into the market. There's a clear definition of what a free range egg is, and then farmers can react, to that supply pool demand. And then there's a decision at farm level, right? Okay, well, we're going to go into this market and we're going to provide free range eggs. At the moment, I think where we are at the moment is a lot of the corporates are making big commitments around regenerative agriculture, but they haven't quite got the pull through yet in regards to, we're going to pay a little bit more for it, and we haven't really got a definition of what it is either. And I think what they're starting to do is they're starting to they're starting to engage at farm level to help in regards with with training, tools, baselining, to help farmers sort of start adopting regenerative practices. But I would definitely say there's a warning to this. What the supply chain has been extraordinarily good at is commoditizing everything that agriculture produces. So everything that we produce is turned into a commodity. We're selling beef. Everybody's quite happy buying that commodity from from the farm. What we are going to have in the future is potentially we're going to have carbon and maybe even biodiversity. So all of a sudden, I've got 2 other products I can sell, and I don't have to sell it to whoever's buying that commodity from me, because you buy that commodity at that commodity price. Fine. I'm now going to sell my carbon to Google, BP, Shell, British Airways, all of a sudden, and then all of a sudden the food supply chain are going to find themselves, in all sorts of mess. What we need to be doing now is talking about insetting in regards to how can we tie those ecosystem benefits up into that commodity. How can we recognize that price, that pull through, and I think this is really this is going to be, I think this is going to be a great opportunity for agriculture and farming. If you own land going forward, the opportunities are going to be massive, because I think there's a sea change coming. And I think we can see from regenerative agriculture, carbon sequestration, certainly in soils. Again, we know, and again, these are facts and figures that come out of DEFRA in the UK. Of our intensively managed arable soils in the UK, we've lost 40 to 60% of the soil carbon. We lose between, and this is just between England and Wales, we lose 2 million tons of topsoil annually a year. I think in the US, I think that figure is something in the region of 1 billion tons of topsoil. We've got some pretty big challenges in regards to agriculture, but off the back of a challenge comes up some big opportunities. But I think at the moment the supply chain hasn't quite got that pull through right in regards to how do we do this. And I think that's where the opportunity sits, is we need to wrap those benefits around that that product that they're buying. So, and again, it will help the corporates, because they'll be able to inset at that point, because they're not just going to be able to go out and offset all of their carbon emissions. And I think that's that is going to be a risk. And there's a lot of companies that make commitments for 2030. We are 8 years away from that. In agriculture and farming terms, that is nothing. That is absolutely nothing.
Exactly. So that goes back to the point that we're also discussing about being able to communicate and to fight back that commoditization. And here we have an opportunity for farmers also to diversify in terms of what they are selling at the farm, which is biodiversity, carbon sequestration. So these are services that are available to everyone. So I really like the way you frame it. It's a daunting scenario, but full of opportunities. Thank you, Carla. We have a couple of questions here from the audience, and I think Laura has posed the question exactly the opposite of what I was saying. So she starts by thanking your presentation. She said that we have seen that many would like to have standards or certificates for regenerative agriculture. So how can we find this? Are you aware of standards or certifications?
Well, we're on the farm, we're EOV accredited, which is it's a Savory accreditation. I think there's only probably 6 farms that are accredited in the UK. So that's very much about again, they'll come out. They sample certain areas on the farm every year, and they're looking for an increase in biodiversity, plant species, and different sort of metrics that they're looking for. I suppose, I mean, it's a challenge because obviously, the corporates, need some form of validation to say, this farm is regenerating, it's sequestered, X tons of carbon, but I suppose that does come with, quite some substantial cost, and again, we need to be careful that we don't, create a massive cost based around this, that all of the economic benefits that farms were going to get are all of a sudden sucked up by third parties that are coming out and verifying different elements on farm. And again, we're looking at different sort of metrics in regards to certainly around soil carbon. We're going to be looking at probably three different ways of looking at soil carbon on the farm, and again trying to verify, and again, certainly things like satellite mapping, which can be done at scale, pretty cheaply, but question is around accuracy of systems like that. So I think that I think we've got an opportunity to rethink all of this. I would hate to think that that we just use that old thinking that we're going to get somebody out with a checklist on farm, work through it, because again, this is not a set of prescriptive standards. That has worked very well for things like European legislation. When we go and you say, how many pigs have you got in this farm, in this shed, how big is the pen? Okay, this is your stocking density. Works perfectly for things like that. Absolutely brilliant. But when we're talking about regenerative agriculture, and the key thing is getting farmers to think about this differently. It's not about them being told how to farm their farm. What we're looking for is a set of outcomes. So we're looking at to be sequestering more carbon. How you do that is down, as long as it's not illegal, and you're not breaking the law and doing something terrible, that's down to you. We can give you a set of principles. We can give, we can certainly help you, and we can provide some guidance, and we can provide some training, but it's down to you. And I think that, again, this is the exciting thing. We're not telling farmers, here's a booklet, that's got 300 standards in that we expect you to farm to, and we're going to come out and we're going to tick everyone off. And I think this is the opportunity that we've got, that maybe we can really boil this down to some iceberg metrics, or maybe 3 or 4 metrics that we can go on farm, and if we can do that at scale through satellite mapping or something else, I think there's a real opportunity to prove, to get these proof points that farming and agriculture is regenerating. We are having a benefit, and the cost benefit goes, or most of it goes, back to the landowner and the farmer.
Okay, that's a great explanation, Carl, and goes back to what we were discussing in previous seminars, that regenerative agriculture is basically at the moment a set of goals and objectives more than a set of practices. But this is still early days, the challenge is daunting, so it's good that we start to think about these questions. Carl, Rosano, one last question. We then need to move on, but Rosano is asking, is the 5 Farms program, in your opinion, is it starting to be successful in terms of the actors, so the farmers and the companies and so on, that are getting involved? Do they follow your trainings? So what is your opinion?
Yeah, so
whatever you can disclose.
Yeah, I mean, very, very simply, I think, anybody involved in agriculture, unless you're pig and poultry, because that's predominantly behind closed doors. But I tell people, and I've done this myself, agriculture, farming is probably one of the few industries which is it's a real visualization for everyone to see of your expertise and skill. Everybody can look over the hedge and see what you're doing. If you got a factory and you make something and it blows up, or it goes wrong, or it doesn't work, you put it in the bin and nobody sees it. Agriculture is completely different to that. There's a lot of peer pressure to conform to what everyone else is doing. When we started going down that route of regenerative agriculture on the farm looks messy. You know, it's a very different way of farming. Mother Nature isn't tidy. You know, she doesn't do straight lines. You know, she doesn't do grass at 2 inches long. She's messy. Yeah, and we had the local village asking us whether we'd stopped farming. We had our landlord came to us and said, we're concerned at what's going on the farm. So yeah, we've had those conversations and really sort of won over hearts and minds in regards to that transition. And I think what we're seeing now is we had an event probably 2 weeks ago. We had we advertised it, and we were looking for about 60-70 farmers. We didn't advertise it massively. It was sort of on social media. We sold those tickets, and we were selling tickets because they were £25 a ticket. We sold those tickets within 2 weeks. There's a massive interest. There is a massive interest at the moment around regenerative agriculture, and I think this is being driven. When we look at input prices, red diesel prices in the UK, which is what agriculture uses, has almost doubled in price. Fertilizer, ammonium nitrate, again, more than doubled in price. It's probably trading at close to £700 a ton. Some real big cost drivers that are making people look, differently at their business. How can we decouple ourselves from these input costs? And a lot of people are really, really interested in what we're doing. So farming, they want to see it. They want to smell it, they want to touch it, and they want to talk, and some of the questions that we get is, is really is stuff about, what water troughs do you use? What water fittings do you use? What electric fencing are you using? Some real sort of practical stuff. And I think that's the beauty of the farm, is that connection with, well, we tried that didn't work. That was a nightmare. We've done this. But what we're seeing is there's a real interest, and again, this is, I think what we're saying is it's a step change. There's no correct sort of route to regen. It's sort of a, if you want to call it a destination, but everybody's journey is going to be different. Some people's journeys might be 2 years to get there, others might be 10. So there's no right or wrong way. If we can get people moving, if we can get people to start transitioning, that's what we need. Is we need people to start changing and adopting practices. And I think once you get them,
the path, isn't it,
once they get moving, that it's incredible how quickly
it will start
go.
happening. And so Øystein is not here, but I believe he's Norwegian. Norwegians, they have a saying that nothing can be ever so bad that no goods comes out of it. And what we see with the unfortunate situation with Ukrainian is that the prices of the inputs are actually calling attention for this regenerative practice and alternatives. So in that sense, I think we can capitalize on that. Carl, thank you so much. We really need to move on. That was a great explanation. Please stay with us if we can. We already have with us Elisa Vanyo, that works as a project manager in the Baltic Sea Action Group. Welcome, Elisa. Let me just quickly introduce you to Elisa. She works as a project manager at the Baltic Sea Action Group, focusing on regenerative agriculture and international soil collaborations. Elisa has a PhD in environmental science from Helsinki University, where she researched the emissions and sinks of greenhouse gases in forest and urban areas. The BSAG, which is the Baltic Sea Action Group, carry out action both on land and sea, bringing together all parties needed to save the Baltic Sea. Carbon Action Platform contains multiple projects, funders, farmers, advisors, researchers, and companies. It was established in 2017 by the BSAG, together with the Finnish Meteorological Institute as the coordinator of this research. So Carbon Action aims at multiple benefits through regenerative agriculture, improved yield, biodiversity and resilience, climate change mitigation, and reduction of emissions to water bodies such as, obviously, the Baltic Sea. Carbon Action develops and researches ways to accelerate and scientifically verify soil carbon storage. Elisa, thank you so much for being here. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claudia, and thanks so much for inviting me to this webinar. It's really, really a pleasure to join you, and it's really nice to present carbon action work here. And also, I really thank Carl for the first presentation. It was really, really good and already raised so many good points. I will share my screen.
We cannot see your screen yet, Elisa.
It's for some reason it's still loading, but it's working on it. So
Okay.
very soon it's ready. I don't know why it took so long. Yes, but thank you also for introducing me so well. So I don't really have to use much time for that at the moment. And as already mentioned, I worked in the Baltic Sea Action Group, and this is the carbon action work that I'm going to present you today. And now you should see the second slide. So
yes,
I'm
yes.
first going to tell something about this Baltic Sea Action Group very shortly. So this is an independent foundation established in 2008, and our funding comes from donations, both from companies and individuals, and also we have project money coming from various sources to different projects. And as already mentioned, we work to restore the good ecological balance of the Baltic Sea. And we work as a matchmaker and a catalyst for change. So we really bring people together to work on the better condition for the Baltic Sea. Very shortly, I want to put us in the map, sort of in Europe, and first of all, why this foundation exists and why we are doing what we are doing is that the Baltic Sea suffers from severe eutrophication, as some other water areas, but this is as you can see from the map, and as you maybe know, this is a very shallow sea, and it is not as salty as many other seas and oceans. So it's very special, and that's why it's also it has such a big eutrophication problem. So this is something that I want to address, because maybe not all of the listeners are so familiar with this, the Baltic Sea, and what's the situation here. And also, as you can see from the map, this is just an elevation map of Europe from EEA. So there is quite a lot of like a lower land area around the Baltic Sea. So also quite a lot of agricultural land in the catchment area of the Baltic Sea. And the Baltic Sea catchment area is actually 4 times the size of the sea. So there are lots of water coming from the catchment area to the sea, and everything that we do on land affects to the sea. So this is obvious, and this is why us as a Baltic Sea Action Group also work not only on sea but also on land. So in this presentation, I will mostly focus on, or I will only focus on the work that we do on land and related to agriculture, and of course the work on sea is more related to, for example, maritime traffic and the underwater biodiversity. But that work you can see, for example, from our website. And as was already mentioned in the last presentation, Carl in his presentation already talked a lot about this multiple benefits of healthy soils, for example. So through regenerative farming, we gain multiple benefits as more carbon into soil, increasing biodiversity, and also better resilience for the yields. So this is also very, I think, nice continuation on Carl's presentation. And also our work is well connected to the other webinars of this second cycle of webinars, and also if you have watched the first cycle of webinars of regenerative agriculture, this is really really nicely connected, I feel. So first of all, I will not so much focus on this or go through this regenerative agriculture, because we have already learned quite a lot about it, but some points on the healthy soils. So healthy soils minimize nutrient emissions to water bodies, store more carbon, reducing the carbon emissions and mitigating climate change. They support higher biodiversity, and as the climate warming also increases the problems in the Baltic Sea, like the eutrophication, and that's why also reducing or mitigating the climate warming is helping the sea, and this also applies to many other water bodies as well. So to present the Carbon Action Platform, we bring together farmers, scientists, companies, and decision makers, all the actors that are needed for systemic change, to work together to increase the use and spread the practices of regenerative farming. This platform started as a pilot in 2017, and as already mentioned, we aim for multiple benefits. This is carbon action and carbon farming is one point that we are focusing on, but regenerative farming is more like a wider concept in our definitions. So this is not only about carbon, even though the name is Carbon Action Platform, just to make these concepts that we use very clear. So farmers are involved through 100 pilot farms that are providing plenty of information, plenty of research data. And also we are producing quite a lot of different materials that are freely available for farmers in one place and for everyone interested. So like educational materials and information materials. We have Carbon Action Club, which is open for everyone, whoever, not only farmers. And there are 1,100 registered participants at the moment. So this is a way to get all this information directly. About 55% are farmers in this club, so around half, and the rest of them are some other interested parties. And this club has existed for almost 2 years now. Then we have a free e-course. I will show a dedicated slide later, but we have 1,700 registered at the moment, so that's also quite a lot, and that's open for everyone. Related to science, we have 21 different research projects in the platform. These are quite a wide diversity of different projects. Some of them focus more on carbon sequestration, but there are also projects on biodiversity and pollinators and so on. Then we have companies involved, 13 at the moment. They are training their contract farmers and developing their sourcing criteria, for example, and bringing the first regenerative products in the stores. And decision makers, we have active discussion and connections with politicians and other government officials. And we are very closely following the decision making, especially related to agricultural policies, of course. And we aim towards better policies on climate and agriculture, and try to affect them and as well as creating efficient and fair carbon markets. So we are closely following and involved in these discussions. Then if we go more into detail in what's happening in the Carbon Action Platform. So the previous figure was the sort of the overall picture, what is the platform about. So we have 100 pilot farms, which we call Carbon Action Farms. They test different farming practices, and they are committed to research and providing the data for research. From 30 farms of these, from these 100 farms, soil samples were taken in the beginning, and then the soil samples are taken 4 years after the started these practices. So they have like test fields, and then they have control fields. They are divided in different groups, so not all the 100 farms are testing the same practices, but different practices. And then just to mention, like in addition to these 30 farms, of these were there were these deeper soil samples taken from those farms. Then we have 9 long-term research sites to study the changes in carbon stocks. And then we have 4 even more intensive research sites where the research that is done is very much in detail. And as mentioned, there are like 21 different research projects on the platform, so not all of them study on these pilot farms, but also there are like so many different projects focusing on different things. So they are not. It's only not these 100 farms that are behind the research. Let's put it this way. But if I didn't mention yet, if you go to our website, carbonaction.org, you will find all this information about the different research projects. So if you are interested in detail in what is all the research, or what are all the companies, or what is everything that is done, I really hope you visit the web page. I already mentioned at this point. Then we have trained 30 agricultural advisors. So that's also very important to spread the information, and so that the farmers get the information about soil health and carbon farming. And first 600 farmers are trained through this company, through different companies training their own farmers. This I won't go much into details about what is the practices and the everything that is behind, because I suspect that many here already know quite a lot about regenerative farming practices, but I want to just to give you an idea on what we especially emphasize. And I think this also, the practices and what is included in regenerative farming, it most likely it varies a bit depending on the condition and the locations. So, for example, what you have in Southern Europe and farming very different types of plants, it might be somewhat different than here in the Nordic countries. But anyway, of course, the microbes are really, really important in healthy soils, and these are the most important workers that we have. And this is what we are aiming at, this healthy soils with a rich microbial networks and fungi and lots of roots and mycorrhiza, and so that it has really a huge biodiversity in the soil. And this is what creates the organic matter, and this is what it means to have a lot of carbon in the soil. So this is really behind everything. Regarding the regenerative farming methods, it's very important first to fix the foundations, so enhance the soil structure and remove the compactions from the field. So water management in the fields is one that we really emphasize a lot in the beginning. This is where it all starts, to have the water management in the field in good condition. Then you can minimize tilling, minimize all the disturbance, of course, balanced fertilizing, not using excessive amounts of them. Year-round green cover is something that we emphasize a lot. And for example, with catch crops and cover crops, one can add the green cover time in their fields. So these are the things that we emphasize on our message and what we deliver to farmers. Then adaptive management is very important. So this is not just a set of practices. This was also something that also Carl mentioned in his presentation. So this is not only the list of practices that needs to be done, and then if those are done, then everything is fine, and regenerative farming is happening, and carbon is stored in the soil. So it's not that easy, but what you really need is at the same time you need methods and planning, but also you need flexibility. So situations are different, fields are different, farmers are different, and weather conditions are different. So you need to adjust and adapt whatever happens. And that's why you really need to think how you do things and when you do things and why you are exactly doing some practices, and that's how it goes. And I forgot to mention that we have just a very new project in Carbon Action Platform that we have in BSAG that is focusing exactly on this adaptive management. So this is our newest project that will focus on this. So related to the science, we have this online data website, Field Observatory, and this is Finnish Meteorological Institute, which is working together with BSAG related to all this carbon action work, and FMI, so Finnish Meteorological Institute, is responsible in coordinating the research that is done in Carbon Action Platform and about this field observatory. In this website, you can see the real-time carbon sequestration from the intensive study sites. And also we have here the world first carbon sequestration forecast. And this is very important to have the data and to have the verification that the carbon is actually sequestered into the soil, because all the different groups in the platform are very eager to know that these practices are actually beneficial. So the farmers want to know, and the companies want to know that they have like scientifically proved that with these practices the carbon actually gets into the soil. So this is what the FMI is working on. And now there is also first study site from Sweden included. So we are indeed doing collaboration with Svensk Kolinlagring from Sweden. So that's really nice. And our free online course on regenerative carbon farming has now been open for a bit more than a year. It was open in early 2021. And as already mentioned, it already has now almost 2,000 registrations, so 1,700. So that's really nice. And it's unfortunately it's not available in English at the moment. It's available both in Finnish and Swedish. And this is also really beneficial here in Finland, where we have 2 official languages, and for the increasing collaboration with other Nordic countries, it's also really handy that this is in Swedish as well. But the aim is to translate a short version of this at some point, also in English. So we hope for that.
Elisa, can we have 2 more minutes?
Yes, I'm just coming to an end. So this is my last slide about these companies. So they have very different ways to work with us in the Carbon Action platform. But companies can affect both the farmers and the consumers. So there are some examples here how they are committed. So as I already mentioned, training their contract farmers, and then also bringing the first regeneratively produced products to the stores. But different companies have made different commitments with Baltic Sea Action Group, how they are doing this work with us. And about the future views, I would like to mention that this is, of course, our vision is to scale up this regenerative agriculture. So this started as a small pilot, this whole Carbon Action platform, and it is already now gained quite a lot of different fundings, quite a lot of different projects, new companies coming in. So getting bigger and bigger, we all hope. And this is we thank all our funders, and you can follow our work both in Twitter and please go and see our website, this Carbon Action website, to learn more. And I'm very eager to, or happy to answer any questions you may have.
Elisa, thank you so much. This was a truly fascinating work that you have been developing in measuring and assessing carbon sequestration and the link between regenerative agriculture and farming. And actually, I was going to ask you to have the link if we want to take part of the Action Club, because I've tried in the past, and it's probably just me, but you know, if you could have just a link on the chat, I think it would be of great interest to everyone. I just have a question for you, and it's also a provocation, since we already have our member of parliament here. So it is known that the EU has been working on a new legislation to speed up the adoption of regenerative and sustainable practices across Europe. But despite this, the fact that we have around 2/3 of our agricultural soils to be very low on organic matter and in fertility, the challenge is how you scale up and disseminate wisely your practices. So you started with a pilot, you have been growing. You already have some expertise. So my question is, what recommendations or instruments do you feel that the EU should have to speed up the adoption of carbon farming? So in other words, what would you do if you were the legislator?
No, I think at the moment we have the group of first farmers who are interested in this, but there would be more and more farmers, of course, willing to do this, but they need to know that it's easy and that it's also supported. So for example, the agricultural policy should be such that it's actually encouraging to do such practices, and at least not discouraging to do such practices. So that's something very important. And maybe the carbon markets, if and when they are somehow established, of course, they need to be fair for those who want to join, who want to start doing this, but also for those who are already doing such practices.
Mm-hmm. And when you refer to fair, what are you exactly referring to? So the appropriation of the value of the carbon has to be equally distributed between the farmers and the speculators?
Yeah, that's more difficult question to go very much into detail, because we don't have obviously such carbon markets yet. But what I mean is for example, so that these farmers who already have sequestered quite a lot of carbon in their soils, because they have already done these regenerative farming practices or carbon farming practices, so it shouldn't be so that they are then that it was a bad choice for them to start earlier than others. Let's put it this way, so that I can formulate a clear sentence. Yeah.
Yes, that's so incentives. If incentives come, they should be kind of in a retrospective way also for those that have been longer. And this goes back to what I was referring. If time is also a variable here in the amount of carbon that has been sequestered. That's an interesting point, Elisa.
But
thank you.
Of course, these are like difficult questions, but I hope and feel that it's still not impossible, even though it's difficult. It's something that we can actually achieve.
Yes, well, it's a huge challenge that we are dealing here, isn't it?
Maybe not difficult, but complicated is rather the word that I'm searching for.
Okay, great. Elisa, we have a couple of questions here from our audience. And one of the questions comes from Daniela. She's quite intrigued to know about the companies you work with. They come to you to apply the regenerative practices. Do they also buy the carbon stocks from this regenerative practice?
We don't have at the moment such system that they would buy any carbon stocks, but they are, as I mentioned, they have different types of ways to be involved, and very much depending on the company what they are actually doing on the how they are involved in the platform and how they are involved in the work. So I would strongly encourage you to go and see our website to see more in detail different companies. But these are companies that want to do such actions, and that's why they want to contact us, and they want to do collaboration, and they want to do some sort of commitment or some sort of actions towards this, and then we are negotiating with them and suggesting something that they could do in their work, and then we are doing contracts with them and like what is their as mentioned, it really depends on the company.
On the company. So part of the companies probably are very aligned with what Carl was mentioning. They are also interested in offsetting their carbon, probably getting more quality from their sourcing. So it's probably a mixture of interests. Just one final question before we move on. We still have our last speaker. So, Elisa, I'm not sure if this is a compliment or not, but Rossano is saying Finland is an amazing country, because I'm not sure if you are based in Finland or in Sweden. I believe you are based in Sweden.
I'm in Finland.
You are in Finland, so this is a compliment, definitely. So Finland is an amazing country, been there a few times to work. Do you get opportunities to develop synergies with the forest sector too?
We are interested in, of course, in the forest sector. At the moment, we are not working that much with them, but obviously some farmers also own forest, so they might already have forest in their farms in addition to agricultural land. But so far, we have more focused on agriculture. But let's put it this way, that also, of course, some emissions and like organic matter that flows to the Baltic Sea comes from the forestry. So that's something that is also interesting, but we don't really have any project going on at the moment.
Okay, so the last question is, can we give a swim in the Baltic Sea? Is it clean waters? Can we go for a dive?
Sure. I was just actually yesterday myself swimming in the Baltic Sea. It's still quite cold, but I would suggest that come later in the summer.
Okay, but at least it's clean and not polluted, given the great work that you've been doing. Thank you so much, Elisa, for your explanations and for your time. And let me start by introducing the next speaker. So Isabel Carvalhal is a member of the European Parliament for the group of Progressive Alliance and of Socialists and Democrats. Isabel is an associate professor of the University of Minho in Portugal, where she is a professor in the areas of politics, democracy, and citizenship studies. She's also a senior member of Center of Research in Political Science in the same university. She holds a PhD in sociology from Warwick University and has published extensively on political integration of migrant communities, citizenship policies, and national law. Actually, currently she is a full member of the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development, of the Committee on Fisheries, of the ANIT Committee of Inquiry and Protection of Animals during Transport, and the US Delegation for Relations with the United States. She is a substitute member of the Committee on Regional Development, of the Delegations for Relations with Canada, and the DAC delegation, and the ACP-EU Joint Parliamentary Assembly. So that's quite a lot of roles, Isabel. So thank you so much for being here. So I'll now hand over the floor to you to give us an overview of this topic from the European Parliament. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claudia, for your generous introduction. And thank you very much to Food for Sustainability for this kind invitation. And I would like, first of all, also to apologize, to excuse me, and so to ask for you to forgive me for being so late. I was in a trilogue in an interinstitutional negotiation meeting on an agri-file, which is quite important, quite technical, quite political. And it took longer than we were expecting or hoping. And so I'm very late, and I didn't get I'm sure the very interesting presentations you had today. Still, I will try to address some of the issues, hopefully some of the issues that, for instance, Elisa was mentioning regarding the Common Agricultural Policy, the CAP, the PAC in the Portuguese acronym. I should remind you that, contrary to all of you, I'm sure I am not an expert, as you could hear. I'm not an expert in this subject, definitely. But as a member of the European Parliament in the Committee on Agriculture and Rural Development, I have been following this subject with great interest. So I will address it mostly from a political perspective, looking a bit into what we are doing at the European level in terms of policy and regulatory frameworks, because this is also important, as we could see from Elisa's opinion regarding the difficulties that I'm sure you still find regarding carbon farming. As you know, the European Green Deal, it sets an ambitious plan and political commitment to tackle climate and environmental related challenges. And the idea is that we achieve EU climate neutrality by 2050 in a fair and sustainable way, I should say. And the 2021 climate law enshrine this obligation in the European regulatory framework, setting also intermediate targets for the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 from 40% to at least 55% in comparison to the 1990s levels. And to achieve this these ambitions, because they are ambitions, but absolutely necessary goals, we need strong measures to reduce emissions. But at the same time, reducing emissions will not be enough. We need to focus on removing carbon out of the air and storing it in nature. And I'm sure our previous experts have referred this as an important thing, or through technological solutions. But this is the way to be able to reach out our targets. And in July 2021, the European Commission has proposed several legislative instruments, including one on the use of land land use change and forestry sector, aiming for something like 310 million additional tons of CO2 to be captured by nature in 2030, which is a rather ambitious goal, I would say. And this proposal is now being discussed in the European Parliament in view of setting its position for the co-decision process, like the one I was now with the Commission and the European and the Council of the European Union. So to set our position to go to the co-decision process and the negotiations with the Council. And I underline here also the European Commission's communication on sustainable carbon cycles. I don't know if you have already mentioned this afternoon. I think it's really an important step. It was adopted in December 2021, and it outlines the EU-wide actions to scale up carbon farming initiatives and industrial solutions in order to capture, to store and recycle carbon in a sustainable way. And the goal is also to propose a EU regulatory framework for the certification of carbon removal by the end of this year. And so it's one of the expectations we have for this year. And as for the European Parliament, we're also preparing an own initiative report on this communication. So it's still in the beginning, and there are still political groups without indicating their rapporteur. So it's at the early stage, but the Committee on Agriculture will issue also an opinion on this own initiative report. As for member states, the Council has also approved conclusions on carbon farming this month, on the 7th of April, I think. So in fact, this is one of the main priorities of the French presidency in the agricultural field, but it is also one of the main priorities at the European level of the European institutions in general. And let me just recall that I'm talking to experts, so I don't have to be worried about exact definitions, but we know that the concept of carbon farming is also promoted in the farm to fork strategy. And in this strategy, it states that farming practices that, and I quote, remove CO2 from the atmosphere, they contribute to the EU's climate neutrality objective and should be therefore is my addition, and should be rewarded either via EU policies or other public or private initiatives. So carbon farming is assessed as an opportunity to sequester CO2 emissions while regenerating degraded agricultural soils by restoring organic matter and boosting biological soil fertility that we need very much. And although several carbon farming initiatives and schemes are already being tested and being set in order to reward financially farmers for using certain techniques to capture and store more carbon in their soils, we know, and I'm sure you have mentioned this afternoon, the truth is that this is all relatively new for the majority of farmers across Europe. So there is plenty of room to improve carbon farming, and there is room to improve the scientific basis of this tool and to develop innovative solutions as well as accurate monitoring and certification. And in parallel, we also have to think about counterbalancing or counteracting, should be the right word, possible risks. For instance, we know that carbon farming practices that work with natural processes can have tremendous benefits for biodiversity, water, soil health, animal welfare, but some practices can also have negative impacts. So it's really important to design carefully the policy instruments to make sure that we find the right balance. And it is also important that practices contributing for carbon sequestration may also deliver on other societal benefits, such as on biodiversity, soil health, while promoting productivity and farm resilience, namely to climate change. So this all has to be equated when we're thinking about designing the policy instruments. And there are already some good examples, such as the development of agroforestry and other forms of mixed farming, afforestation and reforestation in respect of sustainable forest management, and restoration of peatlands and wetlands, and the use of catch crops, cover crops, namely leguminous, and conservation tillage, enhancing soil organic carbon. And of course, the best practices, and this is also something that from a political point of view is important because it has to do with the social dimension. The best practices are always the ones that are best adapted to the local bioclimatic conditions, as well as to social and economic conditions. Carbon farming can become an interesting additional source of income for farmers, in addition to their traditional products, such as food or other agricultural ones. However, and I call attention for this, there is the risk that, huge companies will use this as a way to ease their efforts in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, compensating their emissions by purchasing carbon credits. Okay, so I don't know if you talked about this afternoon, but it's an issue. And in this regard, I must say that our priority must be to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, with carbon farming being an additional tool to reach our climate goals, not as a way to circumvent the most needed emission reduction. A critical step for carbon farming is establishing a regulatory certification framework based on robust accounting rules. And that's the only way to really know the real impact of carbon farming measures, and to ensure that they deliver on real mitigation. So monitoring, reporting, and verification are important, but it is also important to have systems that do not result in heavy, burdensome obligations that drive away farmers. We don't want that. As such, we need a particular effort in research in order to develop harmonized, user-friendly, and cost-benefit favorable tools. A clear and reliable certification framework for carbon farming will definitely facilitate the development of voluntary carbon markets, where farmers receive carbon credits equivalent to their mitigation impact, in accordance with an improved methodology that private actors and businesses willing to reduce their climate footprint can purchase. And in this regard, I would like to highlight the role of public policies to overcome the barriers to wide-scale carbon farming uptake. And in this context, the Common Agricultural Policy is actually a key element in creating the enabling conditions to support the uptake of carbon farming measures, reducing the risks and covering additional costs related with the monitoring, the reporting, and verification. Not forgetting, of course, the role of other policies such as the Horizon Europe, the Soil Mission, or LIFE program. But definitely the CAP is very important. And I would also like, and I'm almost finishing because I don't want to take too long. And besides, I do have to take a car to Charleroi Airport to take the flight home. So everything happening at the same time, but still this is important to mention. It's the CAP conditionality. The CAP conditionality is the mechanism that sets the basic environmental obligations, environmental conditions that farmers must comply with to access financial support. And this conditionality includes already several obligations, and we always have to acknowledge them, and because it's a big effort that is done by farmers. Obligations that already contribute to climate change mitigation. For instance, the maintenance of a permanent grassland and the protection of wetland and peatland. On the other hand, CAP interventions, they go beyond the obligations, and they can provide incentives for farmers to adopt carbon sequestration or reduction practices. And this is the case of the new instrument, which is integrated in the first pillar, for those of you who wish to know this, which is related to the eco schemes. In Portuguese, we call it eco regimes. The eco schemes, and we can also talk about the agri-environment climate practices and the forest environment climate interventions, which are integrated in the second pillar. And so this is not an obligation. These are incentives, financial incentives for those who wish, for those who feel they gather the conditions to go further in their carbon sequestration ambitions. And finally, I would like to stress the importance of providing improved knowledge and tailored advisory services to farmers. It's true that many of the practices that sometimes we talk about are not that new, that they're not a novelty per se, but all the framework, namely on the monitoring, on the reporting, this is new. It's new and it's challenging. And in parallel, the lack of knowledge on which are the best local solutions that we can use, we as a farmer thinking, this also can prevent farmers from adopting carbon farming practices. So in a nutshell, this all has to be equated and is in our minds, in our concerns as we go through this legislative process. So many things are happening now in the European Parliament. You will have bigger news in the near future as the carbon farming file enters in discussion. And this is definitely one of the political priorities we have now and that we will have in the near future. So yeah, this is the overall picture in terms of the political frame at the EU level. And I hope it was clear enough and interesting enough for you all to listen. And thank you again. And sorry for being so late.
No problem at all.
And for having to go out so early, because it's
Maybe
even rude. I was the last one, and then I have
Okay,
to leave.
don't worry.
Sorry.
We won't take long because we are just a little bit over our time. Okay, thank you so much for such an interesting insights and bringing us some good news about measures that have been approved regarding carbon farming, reassuring us that the regulatory framework for carbon is coming up by the end of the year, and also bringing in that this is not one-way problem. Nothing is ever linear. Everything is unique. So we need to balance it all. It's the farmers, is the system, the social cohesion, and the community development. Also, it's also an important the questions of knowledge. I think for Frank here, the role of corporations, aren't they? You know, being just having a easy riding and just putting everything on farmers. Not that farmers probably would matter much if all that money now came into them. So, but thank you so much for such an interesting overview. One question from my end, and just bearing in mind the previous thoughts and in the context of the EU soil mission. So how ambitious can the Commission be to provide the actual financial incentives to accelerate the regeneration of our agricultural soils? Because we know is that the majority of the EU farmers are under strong financial pressure. So what financial incentives can be in place to make sure that this carbon farming is really moving forward, and then we have, you know, the first adopters really opening the markets to bigger fish. So how far is the EU willing to go towards this topic?
Okay, as I said, I think there is a lot of potential that should be explored regarding the eco schemes. I know that they don't answer to everything, but I think it should be an opportunity to be explored. Of course, we may say that at this stage, the programming framework is set. I mean, until 2027, this is the money we have. This is what we have, and I'm not supposed to speak on behalf of the ambitions of the Commission. I know that the Parliament is always, and we have to be. I mean, it's our duty, I think, to be much more ambitious, and that's what we have been trying to do with the climate law and with the LULUCF and the discussion on the land use change.
Mm-hmm.
This is what we try to do to make sure that in legislative terms the frame is as ambitious as possible, but also accompanied with the right financial support.
Mm-hmm.
We know there are limitations, but again, I think that there is still a lot that can be done in the present time with the strategic plans and on behalf of the farmers, from the side of the farmers, still a lot that can be done by exploring the eco regimes. I'm still not very sure, and I say this very candidly, how farmers are acquainted with these new tools, and because what sometimes seems very clear and very
Obvious.
very perceptive, and friendly user and so forth, for others it's not regarded as such. But I would say that the green architecture of the new CAP opens possibilities that go beyond conditionality and are quite interesting for farmers to explore. And we hope that in the near future we will have a further developments.
Okay, so this is also a question of communication and knowledge and dissemination and making sure that we are all talking about in the same language, because sometimes we have different language. One final question here from Leonardo. Leonardo is asking which will be the methods to check if we are really getting results towards this more equitable farming practice. I ask this because
I should say, and I do thank Leonardo's question. It's the most technical question that, for instance, the Commission would be perhaps, well, I would say capable, definitely, perhaps willing to answer, but definitely technically available to, capable of answering. But because it's not up to us to define such technicalities, it's not really the right word, sorry, but I would not be able, I would not be capacitated to give a good answer. So definitely.
This is also a point that is often talked about is the measures. How do we measure that we are actually moving towards that path?
That's precisely one of the big issues and one of the big challenges. How to monitor, how to measure, and this is also very technical and political at the same time. I was today in this meeting on statistics for agriculture, and at the beginning everybody said this is a very technical file, not necessarily political, and it became very political. So these two dimensions definitely will be also present in the answer to this very, very pertinent question that Leonardo puts, but unfortunately I would not be able to answer.
Okay, but someone else is looking after after the question. Thank you for that. So one final question to the panel, Daniela. It's, you know, raising a problem that it would be very good if we get this problem. And the question is regarding carbon sequestration. Offset income may be generated only for 30 to 50 years. When equilibrium is reached, there will be no further income. Hopefully, if we reach this point, it will be already an achievement. How can we overcome this issue regarding financial support and incentives to farmers? Okay, if at some point carbon just doesn't make sense because we are all regenerative, so what is left for farmers? Are they, can they be independent in their activities? Or do you think this would be a problem, not a problem?
I think
Well,
that
Eliza, sorry, Isabel. Eliza already answered. Isabel can also answer, but I would like Eliza to tell everyone later what she wrote in the chat, please.
I can also read it now if that's more easy, and then Isabel can continue with this answer if she likes. So probably for the recording, it's nice if I answer this, or also I read this answer. First of all, I would focus on these first decades, so these first 30 to 50 years at this point. And anyway, if we success in increasing the soil carbon storages substantially in the next few decades, it would be really important for the climate change. And regarding the climate change, I think that this time scale, exactly the next decades, let's say 30 to 50 years, it's super important. And what should happen after that is a good question, but probably depends on how we achieve the goals during these next decades.
Thank you, Elisa. Isabel?
Yes, I agree with Elisa's point of view, and it's really, really important that we can do as much as possible to help out farmers to accomplish this very, very important mission. We can never forget that they are the first guardians and the most important guardians of our soils, of biodiversity, of our lands. So we trust. That's why I was mentioning I was not against companies, by the way, but we do have to be careful with the overall analysis, because this is an opportunity for farmers, and it should not be drowned out or exhausted by others, leaving very, very residual opportunities for farmers. They can have, and they are the first ones to be most committed and interested in doing this, because it's their life, and we fully understand that. So this will be definitely one political issue that we will strive here in the European Parliament. And it's never easy, we know, but it's also our mission. And another thing is that we have, I'm sure this is not so important, but we shouldn't forget this, that we have very different realities, agricultural realities in Europe. We, as you know, in Portugal, we have a minifúndio, that the small lands with a half an hectare, hectare with half an hectare, to sometimes in my area, in my region, when they have two, it's already a big one, And then you have countries, and even in Portugal, if you go to the south, so you have very different realities, different rural realities from the point of view of social and economic challenges that populations are facing. We have rural areas with big levels of depopulation and so forth. And this is not the same everywhere. So these things also have to be measured, because this must be an opportunity for all farmers and not a way to widen the gaps in terms of income, to widen even further the gaps that already exist. So yeah, still a lot to be done, to be thought about.
Thank you so much, Isabel. Carl, on the companies.
Yeah, I think Isabel made some really great points there, and I think and we shouldn't forget who's making the carbon commitments. So it's we've got the big corporates that are making the carbon commitments, and then they're looking down the supply chain to agriculture and farming and going, oh yeah, by the way, we've made the commitment, but you're going to have to do it. And I think there's a little bit of a disconnect. A lot of farmers, I think, as Isabel, has said, care passionately about what they do. They care about, the farm, their land, their environment. But all of a sudden, they're being tasked with something that they possibly haven't committed to themselves. So we need to understand sort of those dynamics. And again, I think that there's a whole different dynamic in regards to do we reach an equilibrium? I think there's people that will sit on both sides of the argument. Within regenerative systems, we can build soil. We're not talking about 1,000 years to build, create a centimetre of soil. We can build soil within regenerative systems. So there may not be an equilibrium. There may be an opportunity to continue this, and once we've got it, and again, this will be an issue for the policymakers. Once we've got it locked up in that soil, we don't want to be letting it go. So that's the other challenge is we don't want to go then back 20 years when everybody starts plowing their land up and releasing all of the carbon, which we've sort of done historically. So I think there's lots of challenges going forward, but again, I think those challenges bring real opportunities, I think, going forward.
And of course, we shouldn't forget that the role that each of us as individuals play in the decarbonization is not the only corporates or farmers, but if we all act with the minimum, we can for sure make a big change. I will call this session to an end. I thank you all of you to be here to have this very interesting and insightful discussion. Thank you so much. Also thanking our audience, and remind you that we will continue next week, same time, same day of the week, and this time we are going to look to the voluntary carbon market. So another interesting discussion. So thank you so much for being here, and hope to see you again next week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.